Ever feel like your pain had to mean something? Like you weren't just surviving, you were being tested? Maybe you've sat alone at 3 a.m., wondering why everyone else seems to glide through life while you keep getting crushed. Why your sensitivity feels like a curse. Why you attract chaos, betrayal, loss over and over again. Why you're the one who always ends up broken while others move through the world seemingly untouched. Carl Jung believed the soul endures a hidden initiation, a psychological trial most people never even realize they're facing. But the few who pass it, they don't go back to who they were. They emerge transformed, clear-eyed, calm, energetically untouchable. The terrifying part? You may have already crossed the threshold without knowing it. Today, we'll uncover 7 subtle signs Jung recognized. The quiet markers that prove your suffering wasn't meaningless. It was the beginning of your awakening. And if you're still watching this, you might be one of the initiated. Jung observed that transformation changes how you relate to being alone. Before awakening, solitude feels like punishment, proof you're unwanted, defective. You fill quiet moments with noise, anything to avoid sitting with yourself. But afterward, silence begins to nourish you. You crave alone time like others crave connection. Hours pass in solitude and you emerge refreshed rather than depleted. Jung linked this to individuation, the soul reclaiming energy from chasing approval. The paradox: the more at peace you become alone, the more powerful your presence becomes to others. Comment solitude if you've stopped fearing being alone with yourself. Jung identified the transformation of your relationship with the shadow. For most of life, we hide darker aspects: anger, envy, impulses we're ashamed of. Before individuation, the shadow leaks destructively or gets buried deep. When you pass through the trial, you stop running. You face your capacity for cruelty, manipulation, selfishness. Instead of collapsing into shame, you channel that energy consciously. Anger becomes fuel for boundaries. Envy becomes a compass pointing toward what you want. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Comment shadow if you've stopped running from your dark side. Jung studied projection, seeing in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. Before transformation, you absorb projections like a sponge. Their crisis becomes your crisis. After awakening, you develop psychic immunity. You notice when someone offloads unresolved pain onto you. Instead of absorbing it, you let it pass through like water through a net. You recognize projection patterns. The person calling you controlling struggles with powerlessness. The one claiming you're selfish has abandoned themselves. Jung called this differentiated consciousness, maintaining your center while staying connected. As individuation deepens, Jung noted intuition sharpening into something almost supernatural. Synchronicities appear more often. You sense patterns, outcomes, motives before evidence appears. You listen differently, not just to words, but to the energy underneath. Someone says they're fine, but every cell knows they're lying. Jung called this active imagination, the psyche communicating in symbols, hunches. You learn to trust first instincts because they're usually most accurate. Right, knowing if your intuition has become your most trusted advisor. Jung's core insight: growth follows death-rebirth cycles. Most resist this, clinging to what must end because letting go feels like annihilation. After passing the soul's test, you stop fearing these deaths. When something dissolves, relationships end, careers crumble, You don't panic. You lean into uncertainty, trusting destruction clears space for creation. You become comfortable with liminality, in between spaces where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. Most find this torturous. You find it exciting. Jung discussed the inferiority complex, endless hunger to measure yourself against others. Before individuation, worth feels tied to approval. Praise lifts you. Criticism destroys you. Once you pass the trial, praise and blame land with equal neutrality. Neither defines you. This is inner authority, trusting your experience over external consensus. Authenticity becomes non-negotiable. You'd rather be rejected for truth than accepted for performance. Your presence becomes magnetic because it's genuine. This is individuation's culmination, energy reclamation. Before awakening, life force leaks everywhere, into people who drain you, projects that deplete you. When you've passed the test, you become fiercely discerning. You stop distributing essence indiscriminately. You protect it as sacred. Jung called this sovereignty, remaining whole in a fragmenting world. Saying no feels like alignment. You give from overflow, not depletion. Others sense something untouchable about your energy, not cold, but protected, sacred. Right? Sovereign if you've reclaimed your energy. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The people who pass this test don't just heal. They become what I call energetically untouchable. They develop abilities most people don't know exist. If you're recognizing these signs, something profound is happening. You're not just recovering. You're awakening dormant capacities forged in the fire of your pain. Here's what Jung understood that most psychology misses. The soul doesn't grow through comfort. It grows through conscious suffering. Every breakdown you've survived, every betrayal that shattered you, every loss that brought you to your knees. These weren't punishments. They were initiations. The ancient traditions knew this. They created rites of passage to mark transitions from unconscious to conscious, from dependent to sovereign. But modern society forgot these rituals. So the soul creates its own initiations through crisis, through pain, through the collapse of everything you thought you were. Jung called this the night sea journey, a descent into unconscious depths where the ego dies and the self is born. Most people get lost in this darkness. They never find their way back to the light. But some, the ones who recognize the hidden initiation, they use the darkness to birth something new. The 7 signs we've explored aren't just symptoms of healing. They're markers of initiation. Proof that you've successfully navigated the soul's most treacherous passage. You didn't just survive your dark night. You were transformed by it. This is why your sensitivity was actually a gift, even when it felt like a curse. It allowed you to feel the full depth of your initiation. This is why your pain was so profound. Because your soul was being forged into something unbreakable. Jung believed that individuation creates what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox, to be both vulnerable and strong, both open and boundaried, both compassionate and sovereign. Jung understood something revolutionary. When one person becomes truly conscious, it creates ripples that give others permission to awaken too. Your transformation isn't just personal. It's part of a larger awakening happening on the planet. In a world that profits from unconsciousness, your consciousness is an act of rebellion. In a system that feeds on fragmentation, your wholeness threatens the machine. In a culture that demands conformity, your authenticity is revolutionary. The initiated don't live life on easy mode. They live it on conscious mode. They see through the illusions that keep most people trapped. They recognize manipulation tactics. They spot emotional vampires. They understand projection patterns. But here's the beautiful paradox Jung discovered. The more conscious you become, the more compassionate you become. Not the bleeding heart compassion that depletes you, but mature compassion that includes yourself. Boundary compassion that knows when to give and when to withhold. You stop being everyone's emotional dumping ground and become a lighthouse, providing illumination for those ready to see, but not chasing ships in the dark. Your journey from unconscious suffering to conscious sovereignty becomes a map for others still lost in their own dark night. You become living proof that transformation is possible, that pain can become power, that wounds can become wisdom. Jung identified specific principles that guide individuated people, what I call the conscious soul's code. First, feel everything, absorb nothing. Your emotions are yours. Their emotions are theirs. Second, give from overflow, never from depletion. You can't pour from an empty cup. Third, love others without losing yourself. Authentic connection requires two whole people. Fourth, trust your inner knowing over external pressure. Your intuition is your most accurate guidance system. Fifth, embrace both light and shadow. Integration, not perfection, is the goal. These aren't rules. They're guidelines for maintaining psychological sovereignty while remaining connected to others. They're the difference between unconscious people-pleasing and conscious compassion. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The awakened soul finally gives themselves permission to discover who that is, separate from their role as everyone's emotional caretaker. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop performing to be loved. You love yourself enough to show up authentically, knowing that the right people will celebrate your truth while the wrong ones will fall away. This is the culmination of Jung's work, the birth of the sovereign self. Not the ego that seeks validation, not the persona that performs for approval, but the authentic self that knows its own worth. The sovereign self can navigate the world with sensitivity intact, but boundaries strong. They can love deeply without losing themselves. They can help others without depleting themselves. They can be alone without being lonely, connected without being enmeshed. Most importantly, they understand that their suffering was never meaningless. It was the birth canal through which their true self emerged. Every pain was a teacher. Every loss was a liberation. Every ending was a beginning. So if you recognize yourself in these 7 signs, carry this truth. Your breaking point was not your end. It was your initiation, and you passed. You are no longer who you were. You are who you were always meant to become. The initiate, the sovereign, the one who turned pain into power and wound into wisdom. The world doesn't need more unconscious people. It needs more conscious ones. People who give from choice, not compulsion. Who help from abundance, not emptiness. Who love others without abandoning themselves.